Welcome back to Strides to Solutions. I'm Esther Adams, and I want to start today with a claim that sounds like philosophy, but is at this point fairly mainstream neuroscience. You are not seeing the world right now. You are seeing your brain's best guess about the world, and that guess was already underway before the light ever reached your eyes. I know how that lands. It sounds like something a person says at 2 in the morning after too much coffee, but stay with me because the evidence is real and the implications reach into almost everything we've talked about on this show. Once you understand that your brain is a prediction machine rather than a recording device, you start to see the same mechanism running underneath dopamine, underneath loneliness, underneath anxiety, underneath the way you remember a conversation you had last week. It's all one thing, wearing different clothes. So here's our stride today. First, the basic architecture, what it actually means to say perception, is a guess. Then, how far in it goes, because it doesn't stop at seeing and hearing, it reaches your emotions and the feeling of your own body. Then, the honest limits, because your brain is not a neutral truth seeker, and I want to be straight with you about that. Then what happens when the system goes wrong, which turns out to be one of the more powerful ideas in modern psychiatry. And finally, why any of this should change how you live on an ordinary Tuesday. Let's take the first step. The old picture of perception, the one most of us carry without knowing it, is a camera. Light comes in, the brain records it, and out pops the world. Signal in, picture out, and you are simply looking at what's there. The research says it works close to the opposite way. Your brain holds an internal model of the world, built from everything it has learned, and it uses that model to constantly generate predictions about what it's about to encounter. Those predictions flow downward from the higher, more abstract regions toward the sensory ones, and what flows upward back toward the higher regions is not the raw signal. It's mostly the mismatch, the part the prediction got wrong. Neuroscientists call that mismatch a prediction error, and if you've listened to this show for a while, that phrase should be ringing a bell so loudly you can hear it in your teeth. It's the same phrase from the dopamine episode, the same idea underneath loneliness and anxiety. It turns out this isn't a coincidence of vocabulary. It appears to be a core operating principle of the brain, showing up everywhere we look. Think about what that architecture buys you. If your brain predicts correctly, very little needs to travel upward because there's nothing to report. Silence means the model is working. Only surprise gets escalated. It's a spectacularly efficient design, a nervous system that only pays attention to its own mistakes, and there's direct evidence for it. In studies of natural vision, the parts of an image that were predictable produced weaker responses in the visual cortex. Your brain was quietly turning down the volume on everything it already expected. An expectation doesn't just modulate the signal, it shapes what you actually see. Research on face perception finds that having a prior expectation speeds up identification and biases how you read an ambiguous face. When the information is thin or unclear, the prediction fills the gap, and what you experience is not the ambiguity but a face, apparently definite, apparently just there. You don't feel your brain making the guess. You only feel the result, and the result feels like reality. There's a related finding I find quietly unsettling in the best way. It's called serial dependence, and it means that what you're seeing right now gets pulled toward what you saw a moment ago. Your current perception is contaminated, in a sense, by your recent past, and the effect is strongest exactly when the input is weak or ambiguous, which is generally sensible because the world usually is continuous and stable, so leaning on the recent past is a good bet. But notice the implication. When you can't see clearly, you don't experience uncertainty, you experience your expectations, dressed up as sight. Now, how far in does this go? Further than most people are ready for, and this is where the episode turns from interesting to personal. Because the same machinery appears to run on the inside of your body. Your brain receives signals from your heart, your gut, your lungs, your muscles, and it does not simply read them off. It predicts them, and interprets them exactly as it does with light and sound. And here's the leap that a leading theory makes. Emotions may be your brain's inferred explanations for those bodily signals, not raw feelings bubbling up from the depths, but inferences, best guesses about what a particular pattern of internal sensation means. Sit with what that implies. Your heart is racing, your stomach is tight, your breath is short. That state is genuinely happening in your body. But whether you experience it as fear or excitement or dread or the buzz before you go on stage depends in part on the model your brain is using to explain it. Same signal, different inferred cause, and therefore a different feeling. Not fake, not chosen, not something you can simply decide your way out of, but constructed, which is a very different thing from given. Even those slippery mental sensations run on prediction. That feeling of familiarity when a name is on the tip of your tongue, the sense of confidence that you know something, that quiet click of, yes, this is right. These have been described as predictions about how well your own mental processing is going, signals about the state of your own machinery that then guide what you think or do next. Your gut feelings are, in a real sense, forecasts. Now, let me give you the honest limits because I don't want to hand you a tidy story, and I think this part is genuinely important. There's a popular version of this idea where the brain is a little scientist, forming hypotheses and dutifully revising them when the data disagree. That's a lovely image, and it's partly right, but researchers have pushed back on it, and their objection is the interesting part. Your brain is not an impartial truth seeker. It's an organism trying to stay alive, and it has favorite states it wants to protect, which means there are two ways to resolve a mismatch between prediction and reality. You can update the prediction to fit the world, or you can act on the world to make it fit the prediction. Both reduce the error. Only one of them involves learning anything. Researchers have a wonderful phrase for what happens next. They call it the stubborn scientist. Predictions can persist even after the world has changed, clinging on past the point where the evidence supports them. And that stubbornness is not a bug in some rare broken brain. It is a feature of the ordinary design because a model that changed every time something surprising happened would be useless. Some rigidity is what makes perception stable at all, but you can already see where this goes. A brain that would rather bend the world than update its model is a brain that can get quietly, comfortably stuck. Which brings us to the part of this research I find the most powerful and which I want to handle carefully because we're now talking about real suffering. If perception and feeling are built from predictions and the corrections to them, then a lot of psychological difficulty can be understood as a problem with how those two things get balanced. Researchers call it precision. It's essentially the question of how much confidence you assign to your existing beliefs versus how much you assign to the incoming evidence. And the crucial finding, which reverses what you might assume, is that the problem is almost never simply too much prediction or too little. It's miscalibration. It's the weighting being wrong for the situation. Depression appears to involve beliefs that resist revision even when good things happen. The disconfirming evidence arrives, and it doesn't land. And studies find that depressed individuals lack the optimistic, updating bias that most people show. Think about how much kinder that is than the way we usually talk about it. It isn't that the person refuses to see the good, it's that the good arrives and their updating machinery cannot take it in. Anxiety shows a related pattern. In one study, an anxious state made people treat their beliefs about what leads to what as if they were more certain than they were and more resistant to updating, which is exactly the mechanism we uncovered in the avoidance episode, seen now from a different angle. The anxious brain holds its threat model too tightly and struggles to let the world correct it. Trauma may install what researchers describe as a hyperprior, an expectation so strong that it functions like a rule about existence itself. Something along the lines of the world is unsafe. And once that prior is running, ambiguous social cues get read as threat, and disconfirming evidence has a very hard time getting through, which is why you cannot argue somebody out of a trauma response, and why simply telling them they're safe so rarely works. You're offering information to a system whose weighting will not let the information count. The same logic reaches into disordered eating, where research suggests that in anorexia, distorted beliefs about the body can dominate the actual incoming sensory input, effectively locking perception onto a model that the evidence should have corrected. And it reaches into psychosis, which is where this framework has its deepest evidence, though the picture there is genuinely complicated rather than simple, involving different levels of the hierarchy going wrong in different directions. I want to slow down and say something directly here because these are not abstractions to everyone listening. If any of that landed close to home, please hear this alongside the science. Understanding a mechanism is not the same as being able to fix it alone, and none of what I've described is a failure of will or of character. It's a system whose weighting has drifted, and there are people trained to help recalibrate it. If you're carrying any of this, please talk to someone who does this work. But I include all of it because there is real hope buried in the mechanism, and it's the hope this entire series keeps circling back to. If a stuck belief is a prediction that has become too confident, then the way out is not argument, it's experience. It's giving the system a mismatch so vivid and so precisely aimed that the error finally has to be counted. This is why exposure works. This is why behavioral experiments work in therapy, and why simply reassuring someone doesn't. You are not trying to talk a model out of itself. You are trying to engineer a surprise, and the memory research says the same thing from another direction. Prediction errors don't only update your beliefs about the future, they reach back and revise the past. Studies find that when what happens violates what you expected, memory gets updated, and that in conversations, a mismatch of the right size can actually weaken the memory of the original version. Your history is not a sealed archive. It's a model too, and it gets rewritten by surprise. So let me pull all of this together because I think there's a single idea underneath everything this show has covered, and today is the day it finally comes into focus. In the dopamine episode, we learned that dopamine isn't pleasure, it's a teaching signal that tracks the gap between what you expected and what you got. In the loneliness episode, we learned that the brain concludes it is alone not by counting your friends, but by comparing incoming connection against an internal expectation of belonging. In the avoidance episode, we learned that anxiety persists because escaping prevents the brain from ever discovering that its threat prediction was wrong. Different topics, different episodes, one mechanism, all the way down. Your brain is a prediction machine, and almost everything that goes right and almost everything that goes wrong in your inner life comes down to how those predictions get made, how they get weighted, and whether reality is ever allowed to correct them. Here's what I hope you carry out of this one. And there are two things. The first is a kind of humility, and I mean that as a gift rather than a scolding. The certainty you feel about what you saw, what someone meant, how a room felt, what your body is telling you, is not a direct readout of the truth. It's a model doing its best, and it is most confident precisely when the evidence is thinnest, because that's when it fills the gaps most aggressively. So when you are absolutely sure that she was being cold with you, or that the tightness in your chest means something is terribly wrong, or that this will go badly the way it always does, that certainty is not evidence. That's just what a strong prior feels like from the inside. And the second is more practical, and it's the one I'd actually act on. If your models get corrected by surprise, then a life that never surprises you is a life in which nothing gets corrected. The predictions calcify. The world narrows to fit them, and then the narrowed world confirms them. So the small, unglamorous, radical act is to go somewhere your model doesn't already have an answer, to stay in the room a little longer than is comfortable, to let the evidence land instead of leaving before it arrives. Your brain will always predict reality before you experience it. That's not a flaw, and you can't switch it off. But you can decide again and again whether you're going to let reality get a word in. That's the stride from certainty towards something you can actually use. Thanks for walking it with me. I'm Esther Adams. This has been Strides to Solutions, and I'll see you next time.